Okay, so we're going to get started today. Thanks to Lola for stopping in to tell us about the lecture series. We'll see her again next week. Today, we're going to continue with kind of our basic step-by-step of modeling more and more complex objects. So last class, we built that little bridge and we concentrated on the corners and the edges and making sure that the chamfers happened and there was no unclean corners and what have you. You were also able to apply a basic material to it. We will do something similar today where I'm giving you a scripted object that we'll be creating, and then you'll make that. And then next class, so in 207, we're going to take a step back into V-Ray again. So as I said, we'll go a couple steps forward in Rhino, and then we'll come back into V-Ray, a couple steps forward in Rhino, come back into V-Ray. And so when we go back into V-Ray, we're going to talk about how textures are applied to objects. It's something called texture mapping, and it'll make a big difference in kind of your overall renderings going forward. So know that that's coming ahead on Monday. In the meantime, we're going to work on modeling something. Today's big topic is something called a sweep, and I'll walk you through the process of creating a sweep, and that's really what we're going to be concentrating on going forward. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And give me just a second to get a little bit organized. Oh, come on. Perfect. And so you should all be able to see my screen. I have the remote desktop pulled up on my screen here, and I have pulled up our exercise 206. This is what we're going to be working through today. There is very much a step-by-step with some images that kind of explain what it is we're creating. This is ultimately what we're creating, which is kind of a simplified version of something that exists as part of a curtain wall system. So if we did glass, curtain wall, spider, clamp, we'd probably see some examples of it. So here's an example. There we go. Obviously, this is more complex. It's got some other pieces, but this is essentially what we're creating today, is a simplified version of this that they use to, let's see, of course, the image that I picked went away. Well, anyway, the idea is that you have a glass curtain wall that is structural, so to speak. It's very thin, very structural, that holds up a giant pane of glass, so to speak. So there's lots of different examples of it here, for example. So we're going to make something like this in Rhino. Like I said, it'll be a little bit simplified. But before we get into that, I want to point something else out, and that is that your first assignment has been posted now. And so this isn't due for quite a while. It's due on the 7th of March. So we've got several weeks to work on it. There's a reason that it's not due until then, and that's because you don't have the skills to really necessarily model everything that you want yet. So for example, before this is due, we'll get into kind of organic shapes and curtains and cloth and whatever, and how that works. So you don't necessarily have the skills for that yet, but I want to put it out there so that you can start thinking about it and decide what it is you're going to try to model, look for some examples, etc. So you're going to be designing a table and a chair. Sometimes people do multiple chairs that go with the table, but your minimum is one table and one chair. The definition of a table and a chair is very loose. I would say a table is something you can put something on, and a chair is something you can sit on. That's about the definition that I take. So if a stool would qualify as a chair, for example, so you can get kind of creative with how you do it. There's a bunch of examples that previous students have posted on the course website, my old course website. I left the link up there at the bottom so you can look at what other people have done and use those kind of as examples. You're going to be creating 3 perfect renderings, so 3 different views of these objects so that I can see those objects from 3 different vantage points. And you will put all of those images in a post on this website to turn it in as part of this assignment. So don't turn it in prematurely. Wait until you have enough skill to really get them all well resolved. But I am looking for 3 images. If you turn in less than 3 images, you won't get full credit. So be aware that that's an important part of this. You should have at least 2 materials. We're not worried about the environment yet. So think of this as like those old commercials, the I'm a Mac, I'm a PC commercial, where it's just on a complete white blank canvas backdrop. So we're concentrating on the chairs, not on the backdrop. So it should just be a white floor and a white wall behind what it is that you're rendering. Okay, so we'll cover this in a lot more detail as we go forward, but I like to point out that it's there and kind of on the horizon, and it's coming. So that's due on Monday, the 7th of March. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with our Rhino for today. I'm going to double click and open Rhino. Once again, I already logged into the remote desktop for DVC. I've already logged into my OneDrive, so I'm ready to kind of get modeling here. I also enabled my click marks and my key commands so that you can see in the lower right corner what it is I'm clicking on and what I type into the computer. And Rhino's loading up here. I'm going to close all of the V-Ray toolbars except for the V-Ray complete toolbar, which I will then dock into Rhino. Let's go ahead and expand this all the way. And since this is a brand new file, I'm going to check my units. So right now my units are in millimeters. That's because I didn't pick a new template. So I could go to File and then New and choose the large object inches template. That would convert me over into the inches units. Alternatively, I could have just come down here, right-clicked on inches, gone to unit settings, and changed my model units to inches there. So either method is perfectly fine. So I can do this by memory, but I'm going to come back to this exercise just so you can kind of see what it is that I'm creating. And so what we're starting with is creating a line that starts and has a 2x2 arc. So a 2-inch radius arc is 13 inches long and then has another 2-inch arc at the bottom. So we want to create that shape in Rhino. And so there's, of course, a variety of ways of creating that shape. We could use our polyline tool to kind of create an outline of the shape. We could use circles and trims. We could even use the arc tool, which is right here. So if I was using the arc tool, we want to pay attention to which method we want to use to create it. So let's say that I'm using the arc center, start, and angle. In that scenario, it's going to ask me for the center of the arc. So the center of the arc, I want it to be over here, so 2 inches over. So I would say center of the arc would be 2, 0 for 2 inches over. And then my start of the arc would be 0, 0. So I'm using those coordinates to get this arc started. And then I would be drawing until this went straight up and down. I can hold down the Shift key on the keyboard, and that'll lock me into being straight up and down. Alternatively, I could turn on my ortho, which would then jump me to that first arc. I can then use my polyline tool to draw a line. Now I want it to snap to the end, so let's turn on my end snap down here. Actually, while I'm here, let's go ahead and turn on mid and perpendicular. Those are the three that I tend to leave on. We'll snap right there to the end. We'll draw a line that's 13 inches. So I'll go ahead and type in 13 inches and press enter. And then I have that last arc to make. So I'm going to do it again using the arc tool, but you could do it using the circle tool and trim it. You could also take this arc and mirror it over to the other side. So there's always multiple ways of creating these shapes. So let's go ahead and use the arc tool. It's going to ask me for the center of the arc. Notice that I have some other options here. I could choose the start point. So let's choose the start point this time. That would be my start point. Then it's going to ask me for the end of the arc. So I need to know where the end of the arc, this would be at 2, comma, -2. And then it would be asking for the radius. Let's go ahead and choose the radius. This radius would be 2. And there it is. So just different methods of creating it using the arc tool. It doesn't really matter which method you use, but ultimately what I'm trying to create is a 2x2 arc there, a 2-inch radius arc, a 13-inch line, and another 2-inch radius arc there. So now that I have that drawn out, let's go ahead and make the perspective viewport large. So I'll double click on perspective so we can see my object. There it is. And let's go ahead and join those 3 pieces together. So I can hold down Shift and select each one of those objects. Alternatively, I could just make a selection box and select all 3. And then I can go up to Edit and then Join. Now those three have become one. So they've joined all the way together. So let's go ahead and flip this up so that it's in the three-dimensional plane. So right now it's flat on the ground. So let's go ahead and use a rotate 3D to fold it up. So I'll go up to transform and then rotate 3D. Notice these are all commands we've used before. Start of rotation axis. Let's pick right along the bottom here. So we'll go from there to there, my two endpoints. My angle or first reference point will just come out to one side. And then we'll move our mouse up, and that then will rotate this shape up into the third dimension. So now it's standing up rather than laying flat. So I have that. The next piece is that I need to draw a circle, and I want the diameter of this circle. So I'll pick the center. I want the diameter of this circle to be a 1/2 inch. Now, right now it's asking for the radius. So I would either need to cut the diameter in half and type in 1/4 inch for the radius, or I can choose the diameter option right here. So we'll pick diameter, and let's set the diameter at a 1/2 inch. So I'll type in 0.5 and then enter. And now I have a 1/2 inch radius circle, and I have this arc right there. So this should look an awful lot like the next image right here in our little exercise walkthrough. I'd like to point out also, this is a good time to point it out, when I type something in to the command line, I've started highlighting that with these the red text. I'm using the code option in Canvas to show it. But when I type that, that means it's something that I've typed in or that you could type in. So I'm trying to identify that as we go through the assignments and the exercises, just so that you can see where it is I'm typing something in versus where I'm clicking on some value. So I have this shape established. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to create a tube or a pipe that has this cross section that follows this curve. And that's where the concept of a sweep comes in. So I'm going to go up to my surface, and I'm going to go to sweep. Actually, it might be solid. I'm always just type sweep. So, oh, there it is. Surface, sweep one rail. Sweep one. It's asking me first to select the rail. That's the track that it follows. And then it asks me to select the sweep shapes. So this is the cross section. So that would be this circle right here. Don't worry, I'm going to do this multiple times today. So if it doesn't quite make sense yet, that's okay. I'll go ahead and hit enter. It's going to ask me where the seam should be. So the default seam position is fine. I'll hit enter. And we can now see a preview while the sweep one rail options come up. So in this scenario, I have two options. I have something called a freeform. I have something called a roadlike. Okay. In our scenario, we're going to stick with freeform, and the rest of these options are all fine. And we'll go ahead and say okay. And so what it did is it created, let me move into shaded mode here. It created a tube with the cross section of that circle that follows my arc up, goes along straight, and then follows my arc back down. So I've created that shape there. So let me take a little break, and I want to talk about sweeps in general, just so you can see what's happening here. So I'm going to draw over here for a little bit, and then we'll come back to the piece that we're modeling. This is not part of what you need to draw today. Let's say that I create a curve. Let me turn off my ortho so that I can make this a little bit more exciting here. Okay, let's say I create a curve like that. I can take any cross-sectional curve and have it follow along that shape. So let's use, right now, let's use a box as an example. So I'll create a rectangle here. Let me rotate this 3D so that it's standing up. So we use the bottom here. All right, so now that's standing up. And if I were to take this shape and do a sweep on it, I'd go up to surface, sweep one rail. My rail would be there. My cross-sectional curve would be there. We'll hit enter. There's my seam. And it then makes this shape forming. Now, sometimes we have little pinch points. So we got a little pinch point right there, but it's generally made that shape. Now this shape is flat. I can extend this by changing the height of this shape. So let's take these control points there and let's move them. So I'm typing move, V for vertical, and we'll make those go up. So now you can see that that goes up and then comes back down. I can do the same sweep. So surface, sweep one rail. There's my rail. There's my cross-sectional curve. I'll hit enter. There's my seam, enter. And so now it's following that arc and creating the shape that goes along that arc like that. Now here we might be able to set some examples. So in the freeform, you can see that it kind of banks into the turn. It's not always flat. If you pick the road-like, well, we've got a little issue happening right there, but it should generally stay flat. And of course, my example, it's twisting around on itself, which is no fun. So in that scenario, it's not the best example. So we'll stick with freeform like that. So now the astute student would notice that there was a second option, and that was a sweep two rails. And this is where we take a rail and we create a second rail. So let's move and create a second rail right over there. Now we can independently control the second rail. So let's say we go with these points here. Let's move them so that they get bigger. Oops, they cross. Hold on. I meant to move these points. So let's move those over and let's move them a little bit higher for illustration purposes, like that. When I go to create this sweep, I'm going to go up to surface and then sweep two rails. It's going to ask me to select the first rail followed by the second rail. And then it's going to ask me for that cross-sectional sweep shape, which is that rectangle. I'll hit enter. Now, when this happens, there's my seam. It's actually going to use both rails and it's going to change the size of that square as it gets bigger. So go ahead and say okay here. And you can see that it starts out here, but when those two lines and those two rails get further apart, it enlarges the cross section to still span between those. So we get a bigger cross section in the middle. Right, you could tell that I have a little pinch point here. They're a little close together, so I would really need to make some edits to this shape. But again, it's just an illustration of what we can do. So let's go back to my original shape. Let's select those. We can go ahead and delete those. I could press the delete key on the keyboard as well. And let's select my original object. I'm going to type Z for zoom, S for selected. So I recenter the work around that one object. And we're going to create some little buttons on the end here. So we can do that using a curve and then extruding the curve, or we could come over here into our solids and we could use a basic cylinder. So let's use a basic cylinder. Now it's going to ask me for the base of the cylinder, and it would be really convenient to snap right in here. I can't see through this object to snap to the end of my line. So I'm going to switch my view from shaded mode into something called ghosted mode. And ghosted mode makes the solid object still there, but we can kind of see through it a little bit. So I can see in there and pick that center of my original curve. So let's do a diameter here of, I think I said 1.25 inches. Let me just double check here. An 1.5 inches. I said 1.5 inches. So let's go back to Rhino. There we go. My diameter is 1.5 inches, so I'll type 1.5 and then enter. And my end of the cylinder this time, I don't want it to go up. I want it to go down. So let's go down by 1/4. So I'll say 0.25. And there's that first little button. Do the same thing over at this end. So I'll pick my cylinder shape. We'll snap to the center. We'll choose my diameter of 1.5. And my distance here is going to be 0.25. And that time it went up instead of down. That was my mistake. So I'm going to have to move this down. So let's go move. And we could actually snap to the side here and move it down there as well. So we have those first two little buttons. I'm going to take those two little buttons and I'm going to copy them and put them down to create the other side of the glass. So let's assume that the glass is a 1/2 inch. So if I were to copy these, I go to transform and then copy. I could also type copy into the command line. I'm going to copy it vertically. So I'm going to turn on vertical as yes. Point to copy from, we'll pick one of these edges here. And I want to go down by 3/4 of an inch. It's a 1/4 of an inch for the first little puck, and then a 1/2 inch for the glass. So I'll type 0.75 inches. Oops, I should have typed negative 0.75 inches. Sorry about that. There we go. And now it's being copied down. I'll hit enter to finish. And then obviously I have to clean up these two mistakes. So I'll hold down shift, select them both, press the delete key on my keyboard. And now I have that first piece of the clamp. So the next piece of this puzzle is to take this object and to actually rotate it so that it's at 45 degrees, because I want it over here. So I'm going to go up to transform and then choose rotate. I don't need a rotate 3D here because I'm only rotating in the XY plane. So I'll choose transform and then rotate. And I'm once again going to snap to that center right there. And so this time we'll come out to one side. Let's turn on ortho here. And I can then rotate it, but I want to rotate it at 45 degrees. So since I'm not snapping to 45 degrees, I'm just going to type in 45. And you see there's the nice preview, and I'll hit enter. And that then rotates my object. So it's at 45 degrees. Now, if you see this, I've set it up so that it basically falls on a 1 foot by 1 foot grid, is how the spider would come together. So there it is. So we've got half the spider. We need the other half going this way. So there's two different ways of doing it, and I'll show you this in both strategies. First thing I can do is just copy it. So let's go to transform and then copy, or go ahead and type in copy, and we'll make a second copy, and I'm just going to stick it over here to the side. Once I've made that second copy, I can select it and then rotate it 45 degrees. So let's do a rotate, transform, rotate, or I could type rotate into the command line. I'm going to choose the midpoint right there. And this time I just need to rotate 90 degrees. And now it's going that direction. I can then move this over into the middle. Come on. There it is right there. And I've made my second piece. Now, as I said, there's another strategy for it. So let's go back to where I had the first piece. And instead of making a copy and moving it to the side, rotating it, and then moving it back, you can actually select your piece. You can do a copy. So if I go to transform and then copy, watch this. One of the options here is in place. So that creates a copy in the same place. So I don't actually pick a point to copy from and a point to copy to. I just say in place, and it makes a new copy. It's still selected, so I can go straight into a rotate. I can pick the middle. And I can rotate that by 90 degrees. So I didn't actually have to move it away. I just created a copy in place, and then I rotated the copy 90 degrees. It's just another way that's a little bit more efficient. So I don't need this extra one, so I'll go ahead and press delete. And so now I have the base of this little spider clamp set up. So the last piece that I need relating to this is the piece that extends, the little pole that extends out. And I'm just realizing, I think in my handout for you guys, I don't have a drawing for this little pole. So I need to update that. And I apologize that that's not there. I talk about it it's a 3/8" steel cable, you know, whatever, but I need to get the actual dimensions in here. Oh yeah, here we go. Next, using the message, hold the 3/8 diameter tension cable, refer to the dimensions on the back of the sheet as necessary. I forgot to attach that. So I apologize. I'll get that for you. Stick it in there. But I can do it by memory anyway. So what I need to do is I need to create a cylinder, and I could use this pre-done cylinder. I could also create a line and do a sweep. And since we're practicing sweeps today, I'm going to do it that way. Let me create a line, and we'll make that line 2 feet tall. And there it is. Now I'll create a circle right here at the end. And I want this to be a diameter. So I'm still in diameter mode of 1/2 inch. And I need to rotate this so it's standing up. So I'll do rotate 3D, transform, rotate 3D. And I can fold that up. Then I can do a sweep along this straight shape. So I could go to transform, or excuse me, surface, sweep one rail. There's my rail. There's my cross-sectional curve, enter. And there's my shape. Now, this is virtually the same thing as a cylinder. So could I come over here and just create this? I could use a cylinder and say that the diameter, again, is 1/2 inch and the height is 2 feet. That creates the same shape. It happens to be vertical here instead of laying down. Either way is perfectly acceptable. Okay, I like it laying down because it'll help me in creating this next little piece, which is kind of like a donut. So let me select this object, and I'm going to do a zoom. So I'll type Z for zoom, and then S for selected. That lets me orbit around this object, and I'm going to work on the top end right over here. So let's use that top piece, and I'm going to create 2 circles. Let's do the first circle with a 3/8 inch diameter. So again, I've chosen the center. My circle diameter is going to be 3/8. So I'm going to do 3/8 and then enter. I could also do 0.325 if you want to enter the decimal. And there's my 3/8 circle. Now I need another circle that has an outside diameter of, I think it's 1.75, like that. So I have an inner diameter of 3/8 and an outer diameter of 1.75. From here, I want to create a third circle that goes between these 2 circles. So what I'll do is I'll come over here and create a circle, but this time, instead of choosing the center of the circle, I'm going to choose a 2-point. And I can then snap to the side of the circle, and I can snap to that side of the circle, and I've created a circle that's between this circle and that circle. If I do a rotate 3D to this circle, we could stand it up. So let's go to transform, rotate 3D. And I can stand it up like that. So I'm sure you can see where this is coming. I've created that cross section, and I've created my rail. Now I don't need to do a sweep 2 rails, even though I could, because either one of these would work. So let's go up to my sweep. So I'll go to surface, sweep 1 rail. And this is a good point where the rail doesn't have to be in the center of an object. It doesn't actually even have to be touching an object. There's my rail. There's my cross section. I'll hit enter. There's my seam, and it builds out this convenient little donut for us. So since we're concentrating on sweeps, that's how I wanted to create it. The alternative to creating that way is you could actually come over here into our solids, and you could create, I think it's this one. Oh, here it is. You can create a torus. It's going to ask for the center of the torus. There's my center. We'll snap out here to the outside of the radius. And then it's going to ask for the inside. Oops. It should have been diameter. Sorry. Let's try that one more time. Torus. center of torus, diameter, and I'm still making it too big. Well, that's where the sweep comes into play. So somehow that's becoming bigger. I'd have to go back and spend some more time. Let's do the sweep. Let's go to surface, sweep one rail. There's my rail. There's my cross-section curve. There's my seam. And there I have the correct size of the donut. I guess I should call it a torus to be technically correct. Now, if we look in here, let me switch into just shaded mode for a second. You can see that the pole actually extends through into this torus shape. So we really need to clean up that extra. So let's use our trim. I'll go to edit and then trim. My cutting object is going to be the torus, the donut. And I'll go ahead and press enter when I'm done. And then let's select this piece and that piece. And we've now trimmed out that extra bit that's in the center. Realistically, there's also a piece that's inside of this torus. If I want to get rid of that, I need to switch back from shaded mode into my ghosted mode where I can see it. And then I can actually go in and select that interior piece as well. And that trims all of that out nicely. So my trim is done. I've created that little torus. I need to stand this whole thing up. So let's select the whole piece. And let's go and rotate 3D. I'm going to go to transform and then rotate 3D. We'll pick the bottom here. My F reference angle is going along the length of it. And now it's standing up there. So I need to take this and I need it to end up at the center right there. Now, I know that this falls on a 1 foot grid. So I can move this directly to 6,6. So I could go in here and I could say move. We'll snap to the center and I could say 6,6 and it's going to move it right to the center. And that's convenient because that's how the geometry is set up. If you didn't know where that point was and you couldn't figure out where the 6,6, what that value was, you could, let me undo it, I'll press Control Z. I could move it again from that center to the center of this, which should be a midpoint right there. Now in that scenario, this whole spider ends up being too tall. So I need to move it down to match up with the kind of the base plane. So let's go ahead and go to move. So it's transform move, and then I want to move vertically. We'll choose that midpoint. And now it's moving up and down. And we'll come over here as a reference point and choose the underside of one of these buttons. So I'll choose right there. And that then gets it to be the correct height. Once again, I have a trim problem where this is extending through my shapes. So let's use these two there, and let me hold down there as my trims. So I'll go up to edit and then trim. And we can trim off the excess piece there. We could also come inside here and trim off the excess pieces inside. So let's take a look here. And we've got a few more. So this is a great exercise in learning how to view what an object is inside. So there's that piece, that piece, that piece. Now, does it really matter whether you trim all this stuff out? For rendering purposes, no. If we were going to 3D print this object, it actually can matter and can make a big difference on the 3D print. So learning to be clean with your modeling is always a good strategy. So let's see here. Whoops. Sometimes you make a mistake. I'll press Control Z. And I think we're pretty close. One more little piece. Nope, that's not it. That piece there. Okay, I think we're done. So if we did a good job, we should have been able to trim those pieces out. And we've now created the bulk of this spider clamp. I need another rod that goes here because that's going to connect. It's going to be 6 feet. It's going to be 3/8 of an inch in diameter and 6 feet long. So I could start with a line. We come right to that center. I draw a line at 6 feet. Point it up. There it is. Enter. I already have that little curve that we established at the very beginning. I have that curve right there. So I can use that as part of this sweep. So let's do a sweep 1. My rail is there. My cross-section curve is here. Go ahead and press enter. One more enter. There's my seam, enter. There we go. And it's created that cable. So we're getting there. So if I jump back to this little right up here, we're almost there. We just need to turn it vertical. So there's the spider, there's the cable that goes along. Now we need a pane of glass as well. So let's take this whole shape and let's rotate it vertically. So I'm going to do rotate 3D. We'll start at 0, 0. I'm going to go along the x-axis. Then I'll use my y-axis for reference. And we'll stand it up. That looks like I have one extra little curve there. We can get rid of that. And so the last piece is that I need a sheet of glass. So I'll use the box tool. And we'll move this after the fact, but let's do a box that starts at 0, 0. And I want this to be a 1/2 inch thick by 4 feet. So this would be 4 feet, comma, 0.5 inches. And then I want that piece of glass to be 6 feet tall. So I'll type 6 feet. And there's my sheet of glass. Now the sheet of glass, one needs to not be right there. It needs to be moved so that it's in between those 2 clamps. So let's move it. It should be a 1/4 of an inch, but I can use just snaps to get there, which is good. But it also needs to fall in the center of this object. So let's move it again. Right now it needs to move 6 inches this way. So I'll type 6 inches that way. And then it also needs to move. So I've right-clicked to repeat the move, but this time vertical by 6 inches. Now it's right in line with the center. And the idea here is that if I were to have another version of this, right, let me go ahead and show this to you. And if I were to copy it, say from there to there, this would become a curtain wall. See how they start to work together there? Likewise, I could take all of these, copy them again. And I can create another piece of the curtain wall, and those cables join up together as we start to create that shape. Now, I'm not asking you to create the wall yet. That's coming. So let's go back to where we have this single piece. I'm going to move it up a little bit from the origin just for rendering purposes. So let's go to move, V for vertical, and we'll go up, I don't know, a foot. So it's just off the ground. There it is. And now we need to set this up for rendering. But before I do, let's go ahead and save the file. I probably should have saved earlier. So I'll go to File, Save. Let's go into my OneDrive. Let's go into today's demonstration. And we can call this, I don't know, curtain wall. And I'll click Save. Okay, so now we need to do a little test rendering of it. So first thing I'll do is go up to my render menu. I'm going to go to current renderer, and I'm going to choose V-Ray for Rhino. So that's the default renderer. Then we'll go ahead and create a infinite plane. So I'll click on this button to add the infinite plane below the scene. There it is. I could put the infinite plane on its own layer. That's always a nice strategy. So let's take it. I'm going to change the object to layer 5. So I'll right click on layer 5 and say change object layer. That moves the infinite plane to layer 5. And we can then call this infinite plane or IP. And I'll go ahead and lock it so that I don't accidentally select it. And then we need to create a basic directional light. So I'll use that method with the box. So I'll create a little box here. And I'll use this basic directional light, target, and the start of the light vector. And then I can delete the box. So there's my little light. That's good. And the last part is I need to assign some materials. So I could put these things on separate layers just to stay organized. So I could change that sheet of glass to be on layer 1. I'll right click and say change object layer. And we could call this one glass. It's showing up as red because that's the color of the layer. We can change that color to be black so that it looks like a normal object. And then let's go ahead and take the spider clamp itself. Let's change it to layer 2. We change object layer. And then let's rename this to be clamp. And again, that one is showing up in purple right now. It doesn't matter for rendering whether it's in purple, but you can change the layer color. So let's assign some materials to this. So if I go into my V-Ray asset editor, let's open up the drawer to the left for materials. And of course, I have to download the materials. So let me click on that to start downloading. So that'll take a minute or so. While that's downloading, let's go into our V-Ray settings. I'll click on the gear icon and let's confirm that the settings are set correctly. So under camera here, we're probably going to have to adjust the exposure value up to 14. We can come down to, let's minimize camera. We can open up render output. And I like to change the aspect ratio to match my screen. So I'll go to match viewport. And my width and height of 900 by 450, that's fine for our purposes today. So we have to give this a little bit more time to render out, so bear with me. If only they had downloaded these ahead of time. It would have been saved a lot of people a lot of time, but they didn't. All right, so now it's downloaded. Perfect. So let's go into metal first, and let's look at the metal. So I can pick a metal to use as my little clamp. So you could pick, whatever metal looked interesting to you. I'm going to pick a darker metal. So let's see here. Let's do this iron blurry. Okay, I'm going to right click on it and say add to scene. So now it's listed under my materials in the scene. And then I will right click on it and say apply to layer clamp. And so what that does is it's applied every object that's on the clamp layer now has this blurry iron attached to it. Likewise, we can go into glass. And if you pick a traditional glass, it's going to be pretty hard to see it in this scenario. So I would stick with maybe the tempered glass. We can try that as part of the render. So let me right click and say add to the scene. Alternatively, we could maybe pick one. Here's a water blue. Let's add to the scene. I'm going to try these out. So I'm adding a couple extra. And certainly this tinted blue should show up. So we'll add to the scene. So let's start with the tempered glass first. I'll right click on it and I'll say apply to layer glass. And then let's set up this view so we get a nice little view here. Let's zoom in a bit, about like that. And then let's click the teapot and see our results. So we're not seeing too much of the glass panel. Again, this is a very bright scene, so we're seeing through it on the white backdrop. I might change the exposure value up even a little bit higher. So let me go into my settings here and let's go, where's my camera? Let's try that up at 15. And then let's try a different material for the glass. Let's try the water blue. I'll right click on it, apply to layer, and we'll put it on the glass layer. And then let's render again. So I'll click on the teapot. And so that's a pretty nice combination. So the fact that I changed the glass type to that water blue glass, and I changed the exposure value up to 15, we get a pretty nice result out of this render. Okay, so I have those set. We're getting nice shadows cast, etc. I'm going to go ahead and save this rendered image. This is the JPEG. This is what you'll turn in for your exercise today. So let's go up into my live demonstrations. And we'll put that into today's folder. Curtain wall rendered. And I'll go ahead and click on save. So now I have the JPEG. So I have the base file here. We'll go ahead and save that for later. We're going to use that again next class. So I'll go to File and then Save. And I also have my my rendered image, and that's what I'll end up turning in. So that's what we're doing today for your exercise 206. Like I said, I'll give you the dimensions right in here that I forgot to put in. I'll do that right now. For those of you that are in my first session at 12:10, you're welcome to stick around, or you're welcome to come back at 12:10. That's fine. If you have any questions for me, you're more than welcome to let me know now.
I have a question about layers.
Sure, go ahead.
So I've already built the object and would like to add or some of the components of it to different layers. How do I take something that's already been built and put it into a layer?
Okay, so if you already have it built, let me share my screen again. Hold on, let's get back here. There we go. If I already had an object, hold on, we've got to minimize a few things here. So let's say this glass, okay? Even if it was on the default layer or any other layer, if I select the object and then I come over, let's say I wanted to move it to layer 4, I select the object, I come to the layer palette, I right click on layer 4, and I choose change object layer, and it'll change it. If I wanted to change it back, I'd come up to the glass layer, I'd right click, and I'd say change object layer. The other thing that I'll point out in relation to the layers is sometimes you want to select all the objects that are on a particular layer. So the clamp, for example, if I wanted to select all of those objects, I can actually right click on the clamp layer and say select objects, and it'll select all the objects that are on that layer. Bree, did that answer your question?
Yes, definitely. Thank you.
Okay, good. Were there any other questions? No, I don't think so. Okay, so you're free to go and start working on this. My first group, if you'll come back at 12:10, that'd be great, and we'll do a check-in from there.